before the story unfolds. Don't forget to like the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The wind cut sharper in the northern hills and down in town, a cold that gnawed at teeth and stung a man's lungs with every breath. Wade hunched in the saddle, his gloved fist steady on the reins, his horse's hooves crunching over frozen crust. Rides as far out brought him nothing but weariness. Yet he made them anyway. He told himself it was about keeping the land watched, making sure no drifter or outlaw slipped past unnoticed. Truth was, he chased the silence. Silence meant no neighbor asking questions he didn't want to answer. Silence meant no eyes waiting for him to fill empty rooms with words he no longer had. 32 by years, Wade was still young enough, but hard work and lonesome living had carved lines deep into him. Life on the range carried its own scars, ones no one else could see. He'd come west to find peace. Instead, he found responsibility tied to a patch of land outside a town too small to matter. Still, he shouldered it like a burden and went on. By day, he worked the ranch and kept the boundaries safe. By night, he ate alone, slept alone, woke alone. He told himself it didn't cut him. 2 hours from Cold Ridge, with his horse lathered and steaming, he spotted it. What looked at first like a bundle tossed aside near the tree line. A dark shape against the white snow, lifeless. He slowed, eyes searching the timber for an ambush. Raids had come the autumn before, and settlers had been quick to repay violence with violence. Never mind who bore the brunt. Wade's hand hovered near his coat by old habit. He swung down, boots breaking through the icy crust, and moved toward the shape. It was a woman. She was curled against a fallen pine, her body stiff, her face slack with unconsciousness. Her skin was bronze, lips darkened by frost, black hair fanned stiff across the snow. The deerskin dress she wore was torn ragged. One strap hung loose, fabric ripped along her ribs and hip. Bare flesh showed through, bruised, raw. Wade's gut knotted. It wasn't just a cold. Someone had beaten her down, then left her. He crouched, pressed his hand to her neck. A pulse, faint, so faint he almost missed it. He pulled back, ears straining. No voices, no tracks but his own. Whoever had been here was long gone. She was Apache. That much was plain in her features, the beadwork still clinging to one strap of hide. Bringing her into town would be trouble. Men in Cold Ridge would sooner see her dead, and women would spit at her shadow. But leaving her? That would be a death sentence. Wade's father had raised him better. He slid his arms beneath her, lifting her from the snow. She was far too light, her breath shallow against his chest. She stirred once, eyes fluttering half open, lips parting with a whisper too faint to catch. Maybe a name, maybe nothing. Then she fell limp again. The ride back was slow, his horse dragging under the added weight, the sky darkening fast. He wrapped her in his coat, holding her tight, listening for every fragile breath. Each stumble of the horse sent a bolt of fear through him, fear she might slip away before they reached shelter. When the cabin finally came into view, smoke from the morning fire still clung to the chimney. Wade's arms were numb from carrying her steady. He kicked open the door, brought her inside, and laid her on his bed, the only one in the room neat until now. He pulled the lamp close. Bruises marred her ribs and thighs. Her shoulder carried a mark he couldn't place, burned, not cut, old, scarred, but still red. Whoever had done this hadn't simply abandoned her. They had broken her first. Wade set the stove to roaring, put the kettle on, broth warming. His hands shook while he worked. He wasn't a man to show much, but the sight of her stirred feelings he didn't want to name. Pity, yes. Anger, more than that. But most of all, a steady resolve. When he pressed a damp cloth to her lips, her eyes flickered open again. Dark eyes, hazy but sharp, locked on his face. She didn't speak, but fear filled them. Not fear of dying. She had already accepted that. Fear of what he might take before death came. Wade eased back, voice low and steady. You're safe here. I won't hurt you. Her eyelids sank shut again, but her breathing steadied, just a little. Wade eased back a little, steadying his gaze on hers. You're safe now, he said low, not knowing as she caught the words. I won't harm you. Her eyelids slid shut, but her breathing came easier. Wade settled into the chair beside the bed, waiting while the broth cooled, eyes fixed on the faint rise and fall of her chest. He didn't know who had abandoned her or what kind of danger she carried to his doorstep once folks found out. All he knew was he couldn't ride past. Not this time. Not her. That choice, made on a frozen night high in the timberline, would change everything. By the time the fire sank to embers, Wade let his eyes close though sleep never truly came. He stayed slumped in the chair, one hand close to his coat on the table, the other stiff from carrying her weight out of the snow. Every creak in the cabin, every hiss of wind through the shutters kept him half awake. Each time she stirred on the quilt, his head snapped up, the rancher in him unwilling to drop his guard. When dawn pushed a pale light through cracks, his eyes burned from the long watch. He leaned close, checking her breath. Warmer now, though weak still. Some color had returned to her face, her chest rising steady under the blanket. He let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. For the first time in years, responsibility pressed heavier than his land or cattle. He had brought her here, and whatever came it was on him. Wade tugged on his boots, fed the stove, and stepped outside to fetch water. The world was white and brittle, frost glittering across the drifts piled against the cabin's back wall. He paused, eyes sweeping the timber. No tracks but his, no smoke rising anywhere. Whoever had left her die had done it far from here. Still, he knew the town. Men there would demand answers if they saw her. Some would want explanations. Others would want blood. Back inside, warmth met him. But so did her eyes, open now, sharp and aware. She lay still, tangled hair across the pillow, clutching the quilt to her chest. Her gaze locked on him as the door clicked shut, jaw tight with fear. He set the bucket down slow, careful not to startle her. "You're awake," he said. His voice rasped in the small room, and he realized he hadn't spoken more than a handful of words in days. "Name's Wade. I run this ranch." She studied him in silence, measuring, trying to judge if he was another kind of danger. He poured water into a tin cup and offered it. After a long hesitation, she pushed herself up on one elbow and took it with trembling hands. She sipped in small gulps, never letting her eyes leave his. At last her lips parted, hoarse but clear. "Dakota," just one word, but it marked her as more than a body dragged from the snow. Wade nodded. "Dakota," he repeated, steadying the name on his tongue. He set bread and beans to warm, brought a plate to her. She ate slow, careful, like someone who hadn't tasted steady meals in a long while. The lamplight revealed the bruises more sharply now. Marks along her ribs, welts on her thighs, the old burn scar etched into her shoulder. He looked away before she caught his eyes, not wanting her to think his concern was something else. Still, questions pressed at him. Who had done this to her? Why leave her in the snow? Why so close to his land? She gave no answers, and he didn't ask. Survival came first. Trust would take time. He stood, pulled on his coat, and moved toward the door. "I need to ride into town, check the post," he said, pausing with his hand on the latch. "You'll be safe here. Firewood stacked. Stove will hold." He held her eyes long enough to make sure she believed him. She gave the faintest nod, fingers clutching the quilt tighter. Wade stepped outside, the cold cutting him sharp after the cabin's warmth. He mounted his horse and rode down the trail, though his thoughts stayed behind, of her lying in his bed, eyes weary even in exhaustion, body scarred by violence and frost. He thought of Cold Ridge, of how the town would look at her, of what they'd say knowing she was under his roof. 3 years he'd kept to himself, never inviting anyone across his threshold, careful, distant. Now one choice on a frozen night had broken that distance, and he didn't regret it. When he returned later with flour, salt, and coffee from the store, she was sitting by the stove, wrapped in his quilt, needle clutched in her hand as she mended the torn strap of her dress with his clumsy thread. The fabric still hung loose, bearing more than she likely wanted, but she worked with steady determination. Her eyes lifted when he came in. For the first time, they held no fear. Something else had taken root. Guarded acknowledgement, maybe even the faintest spark of trust. Wade set the supplies down, his jaw tight with the weight of it. Whatever story she carried, it wasn't over. And like it or not, he was part of it now. The day drifted quiet inside the cabin. Not the empty kind of quiet, but the sort filled with the crackle of the stove, the slow boil of water, the rasp of a needle tugging through cloth. Wade had hauled back supplies from town and stacked them neatly on the shelves, all the while aware of Dakota's eyes trailing him from her seat near the fire. Wrapped in his quilt, her torn dress hidden beneath, she stitched with clumsy fingers, stiff thread snagging but her refusing to quit. It struck him then. He'd never once asked if she could sew, or if she even wanted to. Truth was, he knew nothing about her. Not where she'd come from, not how long she had been running, not whether there was family out there somewhere. Folks in Cold Ridge would have demanded answers straight off, judgment already dripping from their tongues. Wade had held back. He didn't know if it was kindness or fear of what he might hear. When he sat down at the table, she lifted her head. Her voice rasped, each word dragged out like it hurt. Why? Wade paused. Why what? Her eyes stayed sharp, steady. Why did you carry me? You could have left me. It was a fair question. He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, eyes fixed on a knot in the wood floor. Didn't sit right, he said finally. Ain't the way of things to leave someone breathing out in the snow. Seen too much of that before. Too many walked past folk who might have lived if somebody had just stopped. Dakota studied him for a long while, then lowered her gaze to the dress again. She didn't thank him. He hadn't expected her to, but her hand slowed, steadier, as though his answer had eased some hidden weight. By evening, she was strong enough to try on her own feet, insisting on carrying a bucket of water from the barrel outside. Wade shadowed her a few paces behind, ready to catch her as she faltered. The cold gnawed at her bare feet, the skin raw and red. Later, without a word, he set a pair of wool socks by the fire. When she found them, she slipped them on in silence, but he caught the subtle ease in her shoulders once they warmed her. That night, after supper, he lit the lamp and set about cleaning his coat. Gun oil mixed with the smell of beans cooling on the stove. Dakota sat across from him, quilt draped loose now, her patched dress holding together. The bruise on her shoulder had darkened, and the lamplight drew out the scar burned into her skin. Too precise, too deliberate to be accident, he wanted to ask. He held his tongue. She wasn't ready, and maybe he wasn't ready to hear it. Instead, he asked something smaller. You got Kid anywhere? Her eyes flickered. She stared into the lamplight, weighing the words. Not anymore. That ended it. Wade nodded slow, not pressing further. He knew the sting of loss, had buried enough of his own. The steady click of the revolver's cylinder filled the room while she returned to her sewing. The silence no longer felt like a wall, but more like a bridge, narrow, fragile, but there. Later, when the fire sank low and the chill crept in, Wade dragged his chair close to the stove to doze light. Same as always. But when he glanced toward the bed, Dakota had shifted to the far side, leaving an empty space. Her eyes half closed, still watching him, steady as ever. His chest tightened. If he laid down beside her, it would change things. If he stayed in the chair, the distance would hold. He didn't move. Not yet. Instead, he pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders, settled back in the chair, and let his eyes drift shut. Her breathing steadied, and in that rhythm he found a rare kind of peace. What he didn't see, as the fire cracked low, was the way her hand slipped into the empty space where he might have been, testing the ground between them. The storm came sudden and hard, without warning. By late afternoon the sky turned the color of lead, trees bowing under a wind that screamed through the ridge like a freight train. Wade had lived enough winters to know what was coming. He checked the shutters twice, stacked extra wood by the stove, made sure the latch was tight on the door. By nightfall, snow hammered the cabin walls, the wind swallowing every sound. Inside, the fire glowed, but the cold still pressed in, the kind that sank into bone and refused to let go. Dakota sat on the bed, wrapped in his quilt, watching him warily. She had eaten earlier bread and beans, all she could manage, though some color had returned to her face. Her body still bore the sharp lines of hunger. The patched dress clung unevenly, collarbones dark above the neckline, her legs drawn tight under the blanket for warmth. From across the room, Wade saw the shiver take her. He poured hot water into a tin mug, carried it over, and set it beside her. Drink. Helps keep the cold out. She gripped the tin with trembling hands, sipping slow. Her gaze drifted to the window where snow sliced through the cracks. "This storm," she whispered, voice tight, "it won't quit soon." Wade shook his head. "Could run all night, maybe longer." She lowered her eyes, pulled the quilt tighter around her, silent. Wade busied himself with small chores, oiling his rifle, checking the kettle, but his eyes kept finding her. He saw the way she tried to mask her weakness. Her jaw locked even as her body shook. He understood it. Pride was often all a soul had left when everything else had been stripped away. But this kind of cold didn't care about pride. It killed quick as lead. When the shivering worsened, he made his choice. He set the rifle aside and walked to the bed. She tensed as he sat at the edge, eyes fixed on him like she was reading his every intent. "You won't make it through the night this way," he said evenly. "Fire's not enough. Only body heat works." Her lips pressed in, her breath quick. For a moment he thought she'd refuse, and he readied himself to step back. Then she gave a single nod, clutching the quilt like it was her last shield. Wade pulled off his boots and eased onto bed, careful not to crowd her. The quilt shifted as he lay beside her, his warmth spreading across the narrow space. At first she stayed rigid, turned half away, but the cold pressed harder until finally she leaned closer. Her forehead brushed his shoulder. Her hand rested uncertainly against his chest. He felt her pulse racing, unsteady but alive. He didn't hold her, didn't let his hands wander. He lay still, steady breath, heat given freely. Slowly her shivering eased. In the silence, questions crowded his mind. Had she been abandoned by her own people? Sold off by settlers? What kind of violence carved those bruises? How long had she been running? And what did it mean that she now lay in his bed, not as a prize taken, but as a life spared? Her breathing steadied, and at last her voice came low, halting. "I thought I would die out there. I closed my eyes to wait for it, but I woke here instead." Wade turned his head, catching her gaze in the lamplight. No gratitude there, at least not yet, but raw honesty shone, something he hadn't seen in years. "Not on my watch," he said, rough but steady. She studied him, then let her forehead settle fully against his chest. Sleep found her soon after, her hand still resting against him. Wade lay awake longer, the storm battering the cabin walls, thinking of what it meant to share his bed for the first time in years. It wasn't intimacy, not yet, it was survival. But something had shifted, and he knew when the storm broke, nothing would be the same again. By morning the world lay buried under drifts climbing halfway up the fence rails. Smoke curled from the chimney, but the silence outside pressed heavy, as though the snow itself muffled every sound. Inside, Wade poured hot coffee into a tin cup, watching Dakota stir beneath the quilt. She moved slow, her face softer from rest, but when her eyes opened, weariness crept back. She had survived the night. That much was clear. Her skin carried warmth now, her breath stronger, her shoulders no longer shaking. Yet Wade knew survival alone wouldn't be enough. Questions would come if she stayed. Cold Ridge wasn't blind, and secrets never lasted long there. He set the cup down near her. "You'll need strength. We're going into town." Her eyes sharpened, fear flashing as her fingers clutched the quilt. "No." Her voice was hoarse, edged with dread. Wade nodded slowly. "Supplies are low, flour, medicine, things I can't do without. If I ride alone, folks will ask why I need double. Won't take long before they come sniffing around. Better they see you with me, under my protection." She searched his face, as though weighing whether his promise could be trusted. In her silence, Wade felt the shadow of what she'd endured. Settlers who treated her as less than human, men who saw her as trade. He kept his voice firm. "No one touches you. Not in town. Not anywhere." By mid-morning the sky, cleared enough for travel. Wade saddled his horse, rigging a crude second seat from rope and blankets. When Dakota stepped outside, draped his spare coat heavy on her shoulders, her eyes darted across the endless white, seeing danger in every drift. She climbed on behind him, her hands light on his waist, Not for closeness, only to balance. The ride was long, the snow deep, but the nearer they came to town, the tighter the knot coiled in Wade's chest. He knew Cold Ridge. Wade knew every eye in Cold Ridge would follow them. He had kept his distance from most folks, respected enough for the work he did, but never close enough for real talk. Bringing her into town meant that distance was gone for good. As soon as they rode onto the main street, heads turned. A rancher froze mid-step outside the livery. Two women carrying baskets slowed, whispering behind shawls. At the saloon, a pair of men leaned against the doorway, grins sharp and mean. Wade kept his face hard, his hand near his belt, daring anyone to test him. He swung down in front of the general store and helped Dakota to the ground. She kept her chin low, black hair falling across her face, but he saw her shoulders square, her back stiff with pride, even in fear. Inside, Harlan, the storekeeper, stopped cold at the sight of her, his mouth thinned, his eyes cutting between Wade and the woman. "Didn't figure you for bringing company," he said carefully. Wade stacked flour and coffee on the counter, his voice low but sharp. "I'll pay in full." Harlan's gaze lingered on Dakota, his disapproval plain. "You sure that's wise?" One look from Wade shut him up cold. "Put on the scale, Harlan." The weight of that moment carried through the town. By the time Wade walked her back to the horse, whispers had grown, but no one stepped out. His presence, steady, armed, unflinching, was enough to keep them back. Still, Wade knew this was just the beginning. Back at the cabin, Dakota slipped off the coat and sat close to the fire, clutching the quilt again. "They hate me," she said quietly, not surprised, only resigned. Wade hung his hat, set the supplies aside, and turned to her. "They don't know you. They only know what they've been told. But they'll think twice before crossing me." Her eyes met his. "And if they do?" He held her gaze, voice like stone. "Then they answer to me." For the first time, she let out a breath close to relief. It wasn't trust, not fully, but it was a beginning of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Protection without a price. As firelight danced across the cabin walls, Wade knew his life had been tied to hers, and there was no turning back. The days after their first trip into town carried a rhythm different from any he'd known before. The cabin, once filled only with the scrape of a chair or the hiss of the stove, now carried the sound of two lives moving within it. At first the change felt strange. Wade had lived years in patterns where no one asked where he went or noticed when he returned. Now, Wade pushed the door open after patrol. Dakota was there, mending cloth, boiling beans, or staring out at the snow, as though waiting to see if the world would turn against her again. He took to splitting wood in the mornings, stacking it along the wall where the sun hit strongest. At first she only watched, but within days she carried in smaller pieces. Once, he caught her straining at a log too heavy for a frame, and stopped her with a sharp word. She met his eyes with fire and snapped, "I'm not weak." It startled him, hearing anger in her voice. He said nothing, only took the log from her hands and set it aside. Later, he left a smaller axe by the door. The next morning, she used it without a word, chopping kindling while he worked the heavier logs. For the first time, they labored side by side without unease. The whispers from Cold Ridge followed him back, though no one confronted him outright. He felt their weight on every round, the long stares from ranchers, the lingering looks at the saloon. He never told Dakota how sharp the gossip had become. No point in burdening her with what she already knew. Instead, he poured himself into the cabin, making it steady and warm, a place she might one day call her own. One evening after a long day, he came in to find the quilt folded neatly, the bed made with care. A pot of beans and salt pork waited on the table. For a man who had eaten cold meals alone more times than he could count, the sight struck deep. He sat across from her, eating slow, aware of her eyes on him. "You always live alone?" she asked, her voice careful. Wade nodded. "Always." He didn't have the rest, that even among soldiers and townsfolk, he'd never let anyone close. Dakota lowered her gaze, nudging beans across her plate. "Alone is easier. No one can hurt you when there's no one left to lose." He recognized the truth in her words, but he also heard the grief. For the first time, he wanted to press about her past, the scar on her shoulder who had left her die, but he held back. That story had to be hers to tell. Instead, he reached for the pot and filled her plate again. "You won't go hungry here," he said simply. That night, with the stove burning low, they sat in half-dark. The silence felt different now, not empty, but shared. Dakota sat by the fire, her fingers moving with quiet purpose as she braided her hair, each strand twisting slow and careful. The glow of the flames touched her face, no longer hollow but sharper now, alive again. Wade worked his knife against the whetstone at the table, the scrape steady, his eyes catching on her more often than he meant. When she lifted her head and caught him watching, the air held between them. Neither looked away. Then she let the braid fall across her shoulder, going back to her task, though a faint softness lingered in her expression. That night, when Wade lay down, he expected her to keep her usual space. But as the cold crept through the shutters, she shifted closer. Her hand brushed his arm, deliberate, cautious. His breath caught, not from surprise, but from the weight of what it meant. He didn't move away. Slowly, she left her hand there, curling toward him not out of need but by choice. Wade stared at the beams above, wide awake, knowing the silence between them had changed. It wasn't only survival anymore. It was trust, fragile but real. And in his gut, he knew if anyone tried to take it from her, he'd fight, no matter the cost. By mid-March, thaw had begun. Snow softened underfoot, water cut thin streams down the hills, and the ground turned to mud. The mountains still wore their crowns of white, but winter's grip was loosening. Life inside Wade's cabin shifted too. Routine set in like a rhythm. Wade cutting wood, riding patrols, Dakota tending the fire, mending, cooking. What began as survival had become a shared life, though neither dared speak it aloud. Still, the town hadn't forgotten. Every trip into Cold Ridge carried whispers. At the livery, voices dropped to mutters. At the saloon, men spat into the dirt when he passed. One night, the barkeep cracked a joke too loud. Wade let it pass, but he filed away, cold as a name on a wanted poster. His badge and his reputation still kept trouble at bay, but he knew that shield wouldn't last forever. Whispers had teeth. Back at the cabin, Dakota was changing too. She no longer jumped at every creak, no longer clutched the quilt like armor. She wore the patched dress she had mended, sometimes stepping out beneath the sky, drawing the crisp air as though reminding herself what freedom felt like. Wade noticed the strength in her shoulders, her step firming as bruises faded. The scar on her shoulder remained, but when her hand brushed it now, it was not fear, it was defiance. One evening, Wade sat at the table cleaning his rifle while Dakota brushed her hair by the fire. Lamplight poured across her face, her hair falling loose down her back. Wade found himself staring longer than he should have. She caught his gaze and held it. "You don't ask me questions," she said, steady, low. Wade set the rifle aside. "Ain't my place to force answers. You'll tell me when you want." Her lips pressed thin, but her eyes softened. She looked to the flames. "I was taken before the snow. Betrayed. They sold me like stock at market. I slipped away when they turned on each other. I ran till I dropped. Better to die in the drifts than go back." Wade's chest tightened, anger burning sharp, but he held it in. "You're not going back," he said, voice like iron. Silence stretched, not heavy but full. Then she rose, crossing the room to stand close. The fire warmed her skin. Her eyes searched his face, weighing if he truly meant it. Her hand lifted, brushing his cheek, hesitant at first, then resting there. Wade stayed still, breath caught. Weeks he'd held back, afraid of the line between protector and something more. But as she leaned in, her lips found his and the line shattered. The kiss was slow, uncertain at first, then deepened, carrying everything unspoken between them. When they parted, her forehead rested against his, her breath quick. "You treat me as if I'm not broken," she whispered. His hand rose steady against her back. "Because you're not." The fire burned low as they lingered close. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls, the world beyond still full of judgment. But inside, the barrier between them was gone. replaced by something fragile, human, and real. Wade knew the town would demand answers soon, maybe worse. But he also knew one thing for certain. He would not face it alone. Not anymore. In the days that followed their first kiss, a quiet charge filled the cabin air. Wade went about his work, splitting logs, riding for supplies, checking the outlying ranches. But now, every time he stepped back through that door, his eyes sought her first. And each time he found her there, by the fire, bent over her sewing or looking up at him, his chest tightened with something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Dakota moved differently, too. She no longer hid behind quilts, no longer shrank under his gaze. When his eyes lingered now, she met them head-on. Dakota carried herself with a mixture of caution and growing trust, each step testing the unspoken bond between them. Yet the town remained restless. Whispers grew sharper, though always just behind Wade's back. He heard them plain enough when he passed through Cold Ridge, the mutters that he had taken her as a prize, the sly remarks that a rancher had no business sharing his roof with an Apache woman. Wade never answered the talk, but it burned deep, and more than once he caught his hand resting on the grip of his coat longer than he should have. Each ride home, the weight pressed on him. But when he opened his cabin door and saw Dakota alive, warm, no longer fading the cold, that fear dulled into resolve. One evening the wind came sharp, rattling the shutters though no storm followed. The stove glowed steady, beans simmering low in the pot. Wade sat at the table, boots unlaced, body aching from the day's ride. Dakota set the bowls down and sat across from him. They ate in silence until she pushed her spoon aside, studying him with steady eyes. "You hear what they say about me," she said evenly. Wade met her gaze. "I hear." "Doesn't matter." Her brow furrowed. "It does. To them. They see me as shame, as burden. Maybe worse." He leaned forward, voice flat. "Let them think it. They don't get to decide what you are. They don't decide what I choose." Her eyes searched his face, and after a long moment, she nodded. Something in her posture shifted, not lighter, but steadier, like she believed him a little more. She rose, cleared the bowls, then crossed the room and laid her hand on his shoulder. Wade froze, his breath catching, then let himself lean into her touch. The fire sank lower as the hours passed. When he rose to lay more wood on the stove, Dakota moved with him, her hand brushing his arm deliberately. He turned, and before thought caught up, she stepped closer, her lips pressing against his. This time there was no hesitation. The kiss deepened, her hands clutching his shirt, his arms circling her waist. Weeks of silence, restraint, and distance collapsed, replaced by heat and certainty. He lifted her easily, laying her gently on the bed. The quilt slid loose, her patched dress shifting at the seams. She didn't cover herself, not this time. Instead, she met his eyes, steady and sure. Wade cupped her face in his hands, his voice rough. "Only if you want this." "I want," she whispered, pressing her palm against his chest. The night stretched long, filled with closeness neither had allowed before. It wasn't hurried or desperate, but deliberate. Every touch careful, every kiss heavy with trust built over cold, silent weeks. For Dakota, it was proof she was more than what had been done to her. For Wade, proof he wasn't meant to live and die alone. When morning broke, pale light slid through the shutters. Dakota lay curled against his chest, breathing even, her hand resting steady over his heart. Wade stayed still, staring at the beams above, knowing the world outside would never accept this. But the cabin was no longer only his. It was theirs, and no law, no whisper, no man could take it from him without a fight. As April edged close, the creek roared with snow melt, the ground soft beneath the horses' hooves. Wade woke earlier than usual, the sun not yet over the ridge. For the first time in years, he didn't wake to silence. Dakota was there beside him, hair loose across the quilt, breathing soft, dignity in her even while she slept. He watched longer than he should have, until her eyes opened, sharp as ever, testing if the night before had been real. Wade spoke first, voice low. "You belong here. If you want it, this is your home." Her lips pressed tight, her throat working as if the word snagged. "And the town? They won't stop. They hate me. Wade pulled on his shirt, jaw set. Then let them. I've kept law here 3 years, and I've done it alone. I'm done standing alone. If they want to call it shame, let them say it to my face. That day he saddled the horse and rode with her into Cold Ridge. Not at dawn when the streets were empty, but near midday when the town was alive. Ranch hands lingered outside the saloon. Women carried baskets. Boys played in the dirt. Heads turned as they rode down Main Street. Wade sat tall, badge pinned clear. Dakota seated firm behind him. When he dismounted, he helped her down with a steady hand at her back and walked with her straight into the general store. Harlan stood behind the counter, his mouth pinched as before. Wade cut him off before he could speak, his voice low but edged with steel. This is Dakota. She lives under my roof. She eats at my table, wears what I provide, and no one in this town puts a hand or a word against her. Not while I wear this badge. The store went still. Harlan's eyes flicked from Wade to the other customers, lips pressed tight as if weighing his next move. But one hard look from Wade shut the matter down. Harlan rang up the supplies without another word. When Wade and Dakota stepped back into the sunlight, whispers rippled through the street, but no one dared step forward. The lawman had spoken plain enough. Back at the cabin, Dakota stood quiet on the porch as Wade unloaded the sacks and set them inside. At last she spoke, her voice low but steady. You've tied your name to mine. That can't be undone. Wade straightened, meeting her eyes. I didn't tie it. I gave it, if you'll take it. Her fingers tightened against the railing, her voice trembling but sure. I will. The weeks that followed carried the rhythm of work. Fencing, planting, days filled with earth and firewood. But the air between them no longer held hesitation. At night, they lay close without fear, her hand slipping into his arm resting sure around her. The scar on her shoulder no longer looked like a wound but a badge of survival, and Wade traced it not with pity but with respect. By late spring, he built a cradle out of pine, board sanded smooth, not because the child was expected, not yet, but because Dakota had once spoken of her mother's hands shaping such things, and Wade had listened. When he carried it inside, she stood silent for a long while before laying her hand on it. You remembered, she whispered. I remember everything. Wade answered. The cabin that had once been nothing but silence and smoke now held two lives bound together. The town would never give full approval, but it no longer mattered. Wade, the man who had spent years coming home to nothing, now had someone waiting by the fire. Dakota, who had fled violence and closed her eyes to death in the snow, now woke each morning in a place she had chosen for herself. Their story did not end with distance or doubt. It rooted itself here, in a cabin at the timberline, where the thawing earth sang outside, and inside, belonging had finally taken hold. The man who had belonged to no one, and the woman who had been claimed by no one, now belonged only to each other.